Welcome to our holiday show on Victoria Rumble Room. I mean, what's the dead giveaway here? I'm Robin Adair, and boy, we've had dozens and dozens of fascinating guests on the Rumble Room this past year, and we thought, what can we do as a Christmas present for our almost 700,000 views that we've had since we launched this baby? And we thought, well, let's do a highlight show. And, we've had all these fascinating guests, but I don't think any of them have been quite as fascinating as my co-host with the most, John Jurisic, also known as the Croatian Santa himself. And Johnny, I'm loving the garb.
Well, I'm not entirely sure who Johnny is or who the Croatian sensation is, but I am Santa Claus. Ho, 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 ho. Prancer, Dancer, all my reindeer, settle down.
Do you have any Croatian reindeer?
Well, there's
or they just spend their time they probably spend their time on the beach.
Or as they say in Croatia, well, I don't know what they say in Croatia, but I know what they say here in Canada. Ho, ho, ho. What a fantastic Christmas special we've had. Robin, we certainly, okay. For those of you that might have actually thought I'm Santa Claus, good for you, but I am truly Johnny Jurisic, Croatian sensation. We've sure had an amazing year in the Rumble Room, 700,000 plus collective views, and we've had so many interesting topics and great guests. What a Christmas present from our viewers. Thanks to your support. As I've mentioned, we've had a ton of views, averaging about 50,000 views per month since we started this project a year and a half ago. So a big thank you from Santa, a big thank you from John, and a big thank you from Robin. And with that, let's get on with the show.
You bet, Johnny. And of course, about a year ago, we had COVID-19 shots going through the community, through the country, around the world, and some were refusing to get those shots. There was a general restlessness, a question about whether the shots really helped or whether they were safe, and there were people that were concerned about it for religious reasons, a lot of to and fro. Now, the vast majority of Canadians did get their vaccinations, but still, big dispute around that, and there was an anti-mask movement that grew, and there was travel restrictions. There were people that were actually losing their jobs because they refused to get vaccinated, especially people working in care homes and hospitals, and there's still a lot of anger and unhappiness about that. And some of this manifested itself with the trucker events that took place, where we had anti-vax truckers driving into Ottawa, closing down Ottawa for just about 3 weeks. And it even permeated to other parts of Canada. And we had truckers coming to Victoria, to the BC legislature, voicing their unhappiness about the mandates. And veteran journalist Brian Kieran went down and saw the truckers firsthand and reported that sometimes, at least sometimes, angry behavior took center stage.
It was profoundly disturbing, quite frankly. Yes, I've seen a lot of protests on the front lawn. I've seen 10,000 people out there in the Solidarity days. And, when they really had a beef worth taking to the lawn of the legislature, to see these anti-vaxxers parading behind the exhaust fumes of these trucks, trying to climb on some kind of confused trucker complaint, was pretty disappointing. I know the level of frustration in the public is huge at this point, but the whole premise of the truckers parade across the nation is so basically flawed. I mean, we're asked to forget that the border between here and the States is a two-way street. So even if the federal government was going to relax its vaccination protocols, the Americans won't. So I mean, it's just from that standpoint alone, this whole parade across the country is a waste of time.
It's a crazy time, and I wonder sometimes whether this isn't being heightened because people have been locked in so long. It's been 2 years of just pure frustration. People are sick and tired of COVID-19, and they want to get free of it. And so they're exercising that in kind of these, inappropriate ways.
Yeah, and That is all true, Robin, and I agree with you, but there is no denying that there is a level of anger out there. I saw some displays of anger on the weekend that were, kind of frightening. I was down at my little neighborhood pub there with my old codger pals, and there was, anti-vaxxers outside berating the staff in the pub because they're checking everybody's vaccination certificates, before they can come in, and making sure everybody's masked, and trying to observe the protocols, and they're just getting berated. So there is a level of anger there that it's undeniable. I just think I'm grateful that it's not larger than it is.
Well, Robin, for those that have been watching with their children, I, in fact, am not Santa Claus. I'm John Jurisic. I'm quite sure that you were, perhaps wondering what was going on, but it's Johnny, and I'm back to review more clips from our year. Robin, we've been pretty clear from the start that we thought COVID vaccinations were the best way to kill the pandemic. However, some people lost their jobs, have continued to lose their jobs because they wouldn't get vaccinated. And they decided to take legal action. I'm not surprised. Lawyer Omar Sheikh suggested that the Canadian Charter should have offered more protection.
I think that there's been a lot of absolutism that occurs where we're calling them anti-vaxxers or categorizing them as the other. These are our fellow Canadians who have experienced some significant harm over this pandemic, and we need to be compassionate and recognize that harm. In the case of the folks that I represent, they've lost their jobs. They've been on unpaid leave without access to any unemployment insurance. They've had no money, and when they do get fired, they get fired based on misconduct. So they don't get EI then either, and plus they have a termination for cause on their record. This is a disproportionate response. These people have been financially bankrupt, they've been hurt, they've been punished, they continue to be punished every single day that they're out without income. I see a very troubling relationship between the BCGEU and the NDP. And so there have been already terminations that have taken place of BCGEU government employees. That's already occurred, it's occurring now. There are hundreds of them impacted. I don't see them being reinstated or coming back. I don't see the BCGEU fighting for them or running campaigns to get these people back on some sort of pay or helping them in any way. I can tell you that the legislation that this was passed under required union consultation. So that's in black and white. And so any sense that the unions weren't consulted is nonsensical to me. So I don't know what they will do, but I do know that I am going to sue them all.
Well, eventually the federal government decided to end the COVID-19 testing at the airports and for people arriving in the country. If you were fully vaccinated, that was good enough. And for that, a lot of happiness from the cruise ship industry, because once again, the cruise ships, after a couple of years' absence, could come back to Victoria for the first time, and the business community were celebrating a lot when that first ship docked.
There's nothing that we can do to overcome the fears, right, of residents. And what happened earlier in the pandemic is we had health officials and politicians, quite frankly, from their pulpits for years saying others are bad. It almost became xenophobic in a way, right? If you're not from here and if you're not hyper local, you are scary. You could be carrying a virus. And what we've learned, particularly through the Omicron wave, is that that thinking is ridiculous because COVID is everywhere. Right. And so, however, human beings have their natural fears. So, our effort is to really understand, and we support reasonable measures, such as ensuring only fully vaccinated travelers come. We're doing a little bit of a local campaign. We're partnering with Check TV to reinforce the virtues of the travel industry, how it helps, the farm to table producers, the local businesses here who simply can't survive without visitors. Because regrettably, what happened in the first year or two of the pandemic is that elected officials, very popular elected officials and other officials, gained political advantage by keeping things closed. And keeping Canadians safe was a line that was used over and over and over again. We are a nonpartisan organization, but this is these are the headwinds that our industry has to overcome, which is why I communicate that. And so I think, it will take trust, but I can assure you that our industry is taking it very seriously, and that, all the protocols are in place. And, but we understand that is a natural human element. But on the flip side, you're going to see people from Vancouver Island traveling the world like nobody's business, and they are already, right? People are in Mexico, they're in Hawaii, they've been cooped up for 2 years. So how is it that you can travel, but you don't want to welcome people to where you live, right?
Well, Robin, along with the pandemic, the BC doctor shortage dominated headlines in 2022, with walk-in clinics closing and over 1 million British Columbians without a family doctor. The situation has become chronic. Retired Victoria physician Bill Cavers sounded the alarm.
I really do think it is time for the government, the provincial government, and the healthcare professions to get together and work and have the wherewithal to make some very serious, and I'm going to say potentially difficult decisions, because I do not feel that British Columbians are receiving adequate access to the care they need. It's heartbreaking. I have spent 43 years in medicine. I have spent the last 25 years of my professional career advocating in our professional association and in my committees with government, advocating for enhancing primary care and working out ways where the profession can work collaboratively with the government. And I think that this is humiliating and embarrassing.
Well, John, the grassroots movement, BC Healthcare Matters, was very proactive in the face of nearly 1 million British Columbians without a family physician. They held a number of rallies very successfully. You were involved directly in a couple of those. And one large rally in May in particular was heard loud and clear by this provincial government.
I think that we have reached people in all new areas of British Columbia with this rally the other day. We had a couple hundred people that were even watching virtually. And I've gotten tons of feedback and messages from people indicating their newfound support for us, having just basically heard of us. Our Facebook group has grown with its members, and there was, some other amazing things happening around the province, like another rally that was held in Kelowna. And so that really motivates me to believe that our message is getting out there. And with this new society that we've created, we will be able to do even more of that. And we will be able to reach into all the communities and really collaborate all together to create one really strong message into the government. We were heard by the media for sure. We had the Liberal Party and the Green Party in attendance, so we know they heard us too. And I honestly can't imagine that the NDPs didn't hear us inside. But what'll really matter is their response to us after having heard us.
Highway and bridge blockades by anti-old growth logging activists certainly drew a lot of angry public attention. Former Green Party leader, UVic's Andrew Weaver, said it's important to protect the environment, but black and white demands only alienate the public.
So on the one hand, you're saying to Indigenous people like the Pachidat, we believe in the importance of self-determination. On the other hand, you come along and say, but actually we know what's good for you. And so you should not do this because, oh no, we know better. I mean, it is mind-boggling to me, the hubris, the hypocrisy of these people. And what's worse is that when you actually do things like block roads, you think you're drawing attention to the problem. What you're doing is turning off the majority of the general public from the problem you are actually trying to solve, and you're creating it as a fringe issue associated with fringe people that nobody wants to deal with. These people don't realize that on the one hand, you have, in the polarization of society, you have the far right, the Revenge of the Trailer Park Boys, the Freedom Convoy crowd. They're over here. That same coin has another side, and it's the eco-socialist far left over here. Both of them are shouting at each other. Both of them are trying to get the center to listen to them. The center is looking at them and saying, get out of here. this is where the button needs to be pressed, and that both of these groups are unwilling to listen to anybody or anyone's views and are frankly intolerant of what anyone has to say apart from their own echo chamber. So is there a solution? Yeah, I think time is the solution. Time to recognize that solutions exist. Instead of protesting the Pachadat, why aren't you out there fundraising for the Pachadat to assist them develop the tools and means to retool their mill to process second growth instead of old growth? I mean, why aren't you going to the Pachadat or other nations and saying, what do you want? How can we work with you to advance your interests, our interests, and nature's interest? It's about the classic colonial approach of the white guy walking out to reserve and telling the local people what's good for them.
You know, John, nearly 1.5 million Canadians are of Ukrainian descent, and a lot more people than that have been very, very focused and supportive of the plight of the Ukraine since the Russian invasion. And in BC, the Ukrainian community has intensely watched the invasion and got out, waved placards, and shown major support. And some have done even more. For example, lawyer Stan Osobek chose to travel to Ukraine to meet up with family and friends to try to lend a hand despite the danger.
I was touched by so many friends of mine or acquaintances lately. I was bombarded by text messages, phone calls, and emails from people whom I haven't seen or spoken maybe for a decade or a couple of years, as our paths, diverged in this complicated and busy life, and here they are calling and writing. So I am humbled, and I appreciate that.
Are you hoping to go to Ukraine and perhaps bring your family back to Canada? Is that something you would hope to do? Is if things get worse, to be able to help your family get away?
If possible, maybe, at least for some, for my cousins and nephews and nieces, for some of them, because the males on my relative side are all in the territorial defense team, and so even my sister is also signed up, so they are busy on a daily basis.
Is Ukraine going to prevail? Is Ukraine going to survive this onslaught of terror and ugliness from Putin?
Yeah, this evil empire must collapse, and Ukraine will be the final destination for them. The army moved in, but it's going to be dissolved on the territory of Ukraine.
A regular guest on the Rumble Room has been former senior military attaché, president of the Victoria branch of the Canadian International Council, Chris Kilford. In fact, I've had him on, numerous times. It's fun listening to him and listening to his expertise. He said, support in Canada is matched by our direct NATO support.
I wouldn't actually say we're distant from the battleground. We're on the front lines in a sense. Because of course we have a huge diaspora here. We now have lots of Ukrainian refugees. So we're sort of living this every single day. And we have to give full credit to President Zelensky for his ability to reach out to so many people, to tailor his messages to particular audiences. And in the case of Canada, it's worked tremendously well, and of course the rest of the world. So what we did see in the last few months, as I said earlier on, is the initiative passing to Ukraine. And when that happens, when that tipping point happens, people begin to realize that, hey, this isn't actually hopeless. In those early days, we thought, it was hopeless. Poor old Ukraine, big Russia, be over pretty quickly. Not in the first 3 days, but give it a month, give it 2 months, give it 3 months. And then all of a sudden you get to a bit of a tipping point and you start to say, wait a minute, they may not actually win the war, but they may win the war, something like that. And we can help them do that. So the initiative passes to not only the Ukrainian people in Ukraine, but people everywhere that are supporting them. So I think that's really key, and that's what we're seeing. And I don't expect it to stop, because I quite frankly think the Russians are out of ideas.
There have been all kinds of rallies across the country in support of Ukraine, and a number, as we've mentioned, on Vancouver Island, Victoria. I know people have been supported in Nanaimo and other smaller communities, and throughout the rest of BC. And we've had some rallies at the legislature. People very, very intent on supporting both what's going on in Ukraine and the hundreds of refugees that are safely living right here.
So of that, approximately 75 are in Victoria. The largest number is actually in the Nanaimo area, but they are spread out from Campbell River to Victoria to the peninsula. People have stepped up all over to host.
How are they doing?
The Ukrainians, they are doing as well as you would expect. People have been very successful on the whole at getting jobs. Finding housing is harder, of course, although I've also been surprised at how generous people have been opening up their homes, opening up vacant basement suites, and so it's just nice to see people doing what they can to support Ukrainians. And I would like to say, this is Elena, and you were asking me about how Ukrainians are doing. I think Elena is an example of a woman who is doing extremely well given the circumstances.
How long has Elena been here for?
You've been here 4 months. 4 months. 4 months. I'm sorry. I hope you don't mind I pulled you onto camera. Elena's a single mom, but she's here. She's working. She's got a place, and has been welcomed into the Victoria community.
War maybe stopped soon. I really hope, because my parents stay in this country.
Which is a worry.
Yes, of course.
But you must be very, very pleased to see so many Canadians who are out here supporting you. People
Yes.
from right across the country.
All the time, people who surround me, people support me, help me all the time. I just ask, and people all the time help me, give me advice, sometimes hug, but it's really important.
Meantime, as many Canadians support Ukraine, there's been concern expressed that Afghanistan has been forgotten since the return of the Taliban. I kind of share that feeling. It appears the refugee door has slammed shut on many Afghans still hoping for a fresh start in Canada.
All the Afghans that I know would be happy to return to their homeland if there was a government in power that wouldn't persecute them, jail them, torture them, execute them. They would be more than happy to go home. I think any refugee will tell you the same thing. I think it's important to remember that Canada spent 20 years in Afghanistan, actually before the military engagement and after the military engagement. We spent 20 years promoting a democratic and inclusive Afghanistan. We encouraged women to go into the public arena, to take office, to get involved in professions that were previously closed to them, like policing, even into the military, becoming engineers and architects. And we promoted this and we funded this. So we have an obligation, I feel, to Afghans as well.
Affordable housing and a lack of housing have been major issues over this past year, and the province has brought in new housing legislation, which includes much faster approval on major projects. And Michael Forbes, he's a realtor in town, a former broadcaster, a great guy. He doesn't believe the housing market will slow down this much, even though these new legislative moves have come into place and some people are concerned about rising interest rates. He says buyers across the country still want to settle out west.
Well, number one, governments have to be shown to be doing something, right? Unfortunately, the government isn't in the trenches every day, doing what we do. And they should listen to the real estate industry. There's 24,000 realtors in this province. We do this every single day. And to start passing legislation without consulting us, basically, that they ignored all of the recommendations from the British Columbia Real Estate Association. And then for the finance minister to say that we have a vested interest in keeping prices high was extremely offensive. And if you're a government that's trying to improve the public image and the consumer protection, to say something like that is ridiculous, because all that does is undermine public confidence in realtors, which is directly opposed to your mandate when you're trying to improve the reputation and consumer protection. So there's two things going on. There's legislation that's trying to help with the inventory problem and to sort of dampen real estate prices. And then there's the consumer protection, I suppose, aspect of it. And the cooling off period has got nothing to do with helping people buy homes or making homes more affordable. It will have zero effect on that. And I just add one more thing. They did a recent study in Australia about cooling off periods, and they found that more likely than not, people would not back out of the deal, which is probably, good news for sellers, because they spent all this time trying to get a property and they finally have one and they beat out 6 other offers. And why would they back out now?
Along with housing, transportation was often front and center in the news this past year. Man, it feels like it's been front and center for the past 10 years. This included the continued dream to restore train service to Vancouver Island. And that also has been a long time dream. Will it ever come to reality? A detailed business case was delivered to senior government outlining the case for an upgrade to the 290-kilometer system for a cool $320 million. Let's listen to Larry Stevenson, CEO of the BC Rail Corridor, talk about this issue.
It's going to have a commuter system that will operate in the Langford Victoria corridor during peak hours, at least to start. It's also going to offer freight service. That's going to, it's going to really focus its efforts on the ports, but it's going to be all over the island. And then, of course, we'll have excursion trains. So it's all outlined in the business case, and we're excited to be presenting it because it's really kind of the first step in making this kind of official with the government. I think one of the things that is unique about this particular system versus others that you see is we do have 4 very different types of operations that we're mixing into the revenue here. If you look at how the business case is laid out, the revenue that's generated in the busiest part of the system, which is Langford, is probably lower than the rest of the revenue on the rest of the island. The freight service, it provides a huge opportunity for us to make this not just a break-even proposition, but a profitable one. I don't think that this is necessarily the button that gets pushed that makes it all happen. What it does do, though, is it gives us a point of commonality from which we can start those discussions with the provincial government, with the federal government. It's a lot of money. It's $431 million, and somebody has to come to the table with that money. So does that push it? I don't think so. The fact that we now have a timeline in front of us that was given to us by a court that says that by March of next year, we have to make a decision. I think those conversations are going to have to happen, and they're going to have to happen now.
John Horgan has, of course, resigned as the Premier of British Columbia. David Eby has stepped into that role. And John Horgan's got a lot of praise, I think, widespread praise for his handling of the economy, where he has managed to basically stay out of the way on some major projects like the Site C Dam and some of the gas projects that have been going on across northern BC. And at the same time, did a good job around the COVID-19 crisis. And I think people feel BC has been well served. So way to go, John Horgan. However, there was a bit of a black mark, and he had to do something quickly because suddenly, magically out of nowhere, we got an announcement that the Royal BC Museum was going to be closed. It was going to be replaced. It was going to take 10 years and $1 billion to build a new museum. And, finally, after the public rumbled, the Premier blinked, and everybody's very relieved about it.
Obviously, we still want to see a new museum at some point. We need a new museum, and we certainly want it in downtown Victoria.
Were you concerned that we heard about the old town being removed, and the next thing we hear is that the whole museum's going to be out of there for 8 years? I think there was sort of sticker shock about the whole thing locally, wasn't there?
Well, certainly there was a lot of criticism on the decision, and there was certainly concern among downtown businesses at such a long loss of such an important tourism institution.
Were you concerned that the museum conceivably could be moved or could be moved in the future if it wasn't redone now here?
Well, certainly, it's the Royal British Columbia Museum. It's not the Royal Victoria Museum. And so, we think having the collections and archives that are going to be out in Colwood, and the Premier confirmed that that is going to happen, it would make sense to keep it on southern Vancouver Island, but there's nothing that says it has to. So certainly we're going to be keeping an eye on that to make sure that the current location in the heart of our harbor, next door to our capital, is the perfect place for a BC museum.
When the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade to deny a federal right to an abortion, there was some nervousness expressed in Canada. Was that sentiment somehow going to transfer over to Canada? But Victoria lawyer Roxanne Helm says the Canadian Charter, thank goodness, ensures the right to choose on this side of the border.
I would like, frankly, to assure people in Canada that we do not have to worry that this law in the States is going to permeate into Canada. It is not. I would like to hear our political leaders telling us that, reassuring us of that, as opposed to using the issue as a bit of a political football, frankly. The law in Canada is clear. The law is not that a woman has a constitutional right to an abortion, but she has a constitutional right to be free from a law preventing her from having an abortion.
So what you're saying really isn't that people are being encouraged to use abortion as a method of birth control. What you're saying is that women should have the right within their own conscience, their own religion, their own tradition to make the decision for themselves.
100%. And that's the point. People have the right to make the decision for themselves. So I may have my opinion. Frankly, our political leaders have their opinions. I'm not really interested in hearing what they are. That's for me, and it's for the woman who finds herself in the position of having an unwanted, unplanned pregnancy to make that decision for herself without judgment.
There's been growing concern in Canada about some of the activities of the Chinese government and suggestions of interference in domestic election processes and businesses and other things. Author Jonathan Manthorpe says that China is indeed actively involved in political warfare through its United Front organization.
Xi Jinping, the current head of the Chinese Communist Party and the current president of China, has described it as his magic weapon. And he has expanded this organization massively. It now has groups, cells within every Chinese government department and right down to the municipal level. And its aim internationally is to suborn and control as far as possible all the people in what the Chinese Communist Party calls the Chinese diaspora. And the Chinese Communist Party figures that even though people of Chinese heritage may be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 generations removed from China, their loyalty, their prime loyalty, ought to be to the Chinese Communist Party. And this is the sort of pressure that the United Front puts on people of Chinese heritage here. For example, somebody's phone will go in the middle of the night in Vancouver, in Victoria, in Scarborough, and it'll be their mother on the phone from China. And their mother has been basically taken hostage and is being held usually hundreds of kilometers away from their home, who knows for how long. And the mother will plead with the child in Canada to please don't do any more politics because it is harming the family.
On the civic front, many mayors have been focused on development, transportation. Some of them, who knows what they're focusing on. But Langford Mayor Stu Young was also focused on reaching out and supplying international aid, a consistent theme of his. To this end, he led a small humanitarian mission to the Western Ukraine.
No, I don't think that anybody's done that yet, but we've looked at, it's our 30th anniversary in Langford, and there's this war going on in Ukraine that should not be going on, and we need to do as much as we can and help as much as we can. But it is an area that needs our help. There's 25,000 refugees or people that have fled another city or another place in Ukraine. So we're basically trying to do what we can to help feed the refugees that are there and work with the city there too as well.
Are you a little bit worried about going to a war zone? I mean, you just don't know what's going to come out of the air.
Right. Well, we're trying to be as safe as we can. There is people from Global Medic that are actually on the ground in these cities. So basically, it's really important for us to, recognize the safety aspects of it, of course, and to make sure we take every precaution. And we're leaning on Global Medic to have all of that information for us. And we've got our drivers, the interpreters, and the crew on the ground that are already there. And they've been there since 2014, Global Medic, and we'll have an ongoing relationship with them, with the sister city, talking to the mayors. We can go back and forth, and they can let us know what their needs are at certain times. So it's really important for us to, reach out to the cities that are there. We've got a good group of people, that are coming, and we're bringing also a videographer with us to video everything that we're doing in the area.
And now, as it turned out, Stu Young, along with 36 other British Columbia mayors, lost his job on election day. And the former mayor and consultant, Frank Leonard, talked about what the civic politicians go through in terms of preparation for an election and the outfall, how they deal with both victory or defeat.
Make sure your family's prepared for either result. More people lose than win. So in the adrenaline going into the campaign, you may be aware of where you're likely to finish, but your family is probably more pumped than even you are, more optimistic than even you are. And in some ways you need to prepare them for a bad result. So I think, more people lose than win. You're going to be realistic about this because you're at all candidates meetings. You're at the door. If you're smart, you're reading what's going on, but your family's not. So prepare your family for election night.
In areas of rapid development, such as the West Shore on the island, Surrey on the mainland, mayors and councils went down to defeat. And UVic political scientist Michael Prince suggests many residents urgently wanted things to slow down.
And whether it's the highways and the traffic, I mean, the Malahat Crawl has been getting worse and worse. The rather dramatic blasting, the denuding of hills of trees that will take a generation or two to replant and to get some green back up there. Some of the things that people, and this maybe sounds a bit selfish, but for those of us who've lived here a long time and would drive out there over the years, it was a pleasant transition from a downtown core to kind of a forested. It didn't take long to get out into the country or into the wild, and that country and wild was getting decimated, and you had to drive further out. I think people get that there's population. People say we don't want any more people on the island is a rather silly statement, but and self-serving too. To thrive as a country and a society, we need population. We need to renew. We need to regenerate. So, but you're right. I think it was this has been going too quickly. And then I heard too from some mayors like up island around Parksville, there the incumbent mayor got knocked out, and he was knocked off by a councillor who said, "I think we're growing too fast in Parksville." And his point was, "I'm worried about our water supply." And he said, "I don't know about you folks down in Victoria with your reservoir, but we've got serious concerns about our water supply and our storage and our infrastructure. We've got big questions we have to address. And with this drought we've basically had this summer, I think that really brought it home that, growth comes with a cost, not just, oh, we're going to expand our tax base. Hooray, hooray. We're going to diversify. That's terrific. Or we got a new building here. We got a new facility, a new store. Great. But these things come with costs, whether they're environmental, infrastructure, or just a sense of quality of life."
On a lighter side, but still just as important, the island's annual Cops for Cancer Tour de Rock cycling event was a great success. It was the 25th anniversary trip, and a great build-up, 8 months of training, along with plenty of bumps and bruises.
We had our dress rehearsal event on the 20th of August, so not too long ago now. We call it Mock Tour, and it's a 130-kilometer ride from Nanaimo down to Duncan and back, and through Ladysmith, and the Show and Shine event, and all kinds of great stuff. And we did have, unfortunately, an accident that day. There was a pothole, and the riders were riding along in 2 rows of 10 at speed, and as sometimes can happen, there is a spill, and of course we do everything in training to avoid that, but it does tend to happen once or twice during tour, and of course it's the last thing we want to happen. And thankfully the rider involved, she was a paramedic, and we had a paramedic on scene as well, and it was just a case of cuts and scrapes and a bit of shock, and then she got back on her bike and finished another 50 kilometers that day. So it is a tremendous physical undertaking, and it's challenging, and it's meant to be that way because I think it helps the community get behind us. And one thing we always try to remember is that whatever the riders are going through, it's nothing compared to what the kids and families go through. The best way to donate is to go to tourderock.ca. I'll say that again, tourderock.ca. And then you can support the team in general or select a rider if you know one of the riders. But if you go to tourderock.ca and make a donation, or if you're interested in being a sponsor, contact me, simon.douthwaite@cancer.ca.
Again, on the international scene, many Iranian Canadians have been very upset with the violence towards women and men as they protest religious laws in that theocracy. Victoria's Cheryl Thomas taught business classes in Iran and says it's very risky to speak out.
It is dangerous. And yes, I am in contact with lots of folks back there, but honestly, I haven't been in the last month because I don't want to message them and put them on the radar screen, because in the Middle East, not just Iran, you must assume someone is watching and listening all the time. So I am just careful now. I don't contact them directly. I have talked to folks who've talked to folks. I have talked to folks who've been there and have come back. But yeah, there is that fear. And again, in 2009, when I came home, that was when there was the selection of Ahmadinejad, when the majority of people did not vote for him, but in 45 minutes, they declared him elected. And people in the millions went to the streets then. And when I came home that summer, people warned me, do not speak out. Do not say anything. You will put us all at risk. I think this time people are saying, to hell with it. Speak out, tell the story, be our advocate, because we can't keep having them threaten us.
As we've mentioned, David Eby is the new Premier of British Columbia. He's been making a lot of rapid changes and announcements his first 100 days in office, and more money for doctors, more money for all sorts of different sectors of the economy. And he is now promising to end the catch and release of criminals, dangerous criminals, who they go into the courtroom in the morning, or the police station in the morning. I don't even know if they make it to the courtroom. Right. And they're out the same day, and it's very frustrating to everybody. He's also stepping over municipalities if they don't quickly speed up housing construction.
This is a hard one. Municipalities are only given their abilities by the province. Like, they serve at the grace of the province, basically, right? They're given these abilities to make these decisions for bylaws and zoning and stuff by the province. So do I think that the province could step in? 100% they can. Do I think they should? I do, because 30 years of not building enough supply has led to it's a simple supply and demand equation for us as business guys, right? Like, they've been stifling supply for longer than I've been alive, and therefore the demand has only increased. And so that's going to lead to a natural ramping of pricing, right? And so do I think the province needs to step in? Absolutely, I do. Do I think that the what they've proposed is the ultimate solution? Not necessarily, because it's kind of like a blanket wiping solution. And I think we should be focused on building density around transit lines. I think that's kind of the key messaging that I think needs to happen. Whereas they're basically saying, hey, anyone with an acre plus, go ahead, throw a whole bunch of people on it.
So, Robin, We're nearly wrapped up with our look at 2022, but we don't want to leave out one of the more emotional interviews we conducted with Commander Peter Chance, who's now 102 years old. He served at Juno Beach on D-Day, setting an inspiring example for us all.
Commander Peter Chance is a legend in the Navy, an incredible career. We heard about him and had the opportunity to get in touch with him, and he agreed. And I think it's very important that we record his story for the Juno Beach Center and for future generations of Canadians.
D-Day hit, of course. We were all moved out into our positions. But before that happened, the weather was terrible. So the great armada of ships coming in to land in front of the beaches in Normandy had to turn back.
Second World War, we were the third largest Navy at the end of the war. And we're always looking. So if anybody knows of anybody that they would think that would want to be interviewed, we'd be happy to talk to them.
I feel so honored to meet these people. It seems like we meet them and instantly become almost like old friends.
And they came in the next day. Then they were able to get alongside and open up the bombardment. Anyway, all that was very exciting. Yours truly as a young 20-year-old and a bit. It was quite an eye-opener and part of my history that I remember very vividly.
And we have Santa back. Santa is back in the Rumble Room. Very exciting. And I want to mention that we had a lot of other great guests also that we featured during the year. We only wanted to fit a few in for highlights. We had one guest in particular, a former ambassador to Moscow who lives in Victoria, who got on our program and talked in detail about Vladimir Putin and what an unpleasant character he is. And we didn't want to leave our Christmas show with Vladimir Putin in it. To me, that's like adding Scrooge or something much worse to the mix. So we're not going to run that interview. Still salute the interviewee and all the others, and we thank them. And with that happy note, a very Merry Christmas. And I know that my pal John Jurisic wants to sign off, or as we like to call him now, Croatian Santa Noel.
That's great. For our many viewers that watch our show, we actually don't script that. So I don't entirely ever know what you're going to say, but I sure love it every time we do a show throughout the year. Of course, John Jurisic would like that too, because of course now Santa Claus is ending the year with a few comments. Thanks from Santa to the many guests on VRR this year. We all, including myself, all my elves, all of my reindeer, look forward with great anticipation to 2023. Cannot wait to sit in this chair a year from now and review all the news and issues that we'll be experiencing throughout the year. So for now, best of the season, or as they say in Croatia, živjeli. I am John Jurisic. Oh, sorry. I know of a John Jurisic, and he wishes everyone the very best.
And I'm not in disguise. I got my scarf on for the cold winter weather.
Oh,
I'm Robin Adair. Rumble on in 2023 and beyond.